you should always be recruiting, always be meeting great talent. You may not have a role at this point.
I'm curious, what are some of the mistakes people make in hiring exec talent?
I'd say one of the biggest mistakes people make is they just start interviewing potential candidates and almost form the role around the person. It's totally fine to meet someone and get inspired by pulling a role forward, but get really clear on the requirements first.
How do you identify candidates that are tired?
Sometimes it's in pushback on the process itself. Like if they take a really long time to get back to you, you can see the fire when someone's inside and understand it. And you can also have questions for it too. Tell me the last time you faced burnout. So the first question I ask on every interview when I'm interviewing for my own team or for anyone is, why this role? Why this company? Why now?
Welcome to How I Hire, the podcast where we talk with senior leaders about how they find, vet, attract, and grow go-to-market talent. I'm Andy, founder of Whispered. Today, I'm joined by Heather Doshay. Heather is a seasoned talent leader. For the past 4 years, she led talent at SignalFire and is now advising companies on leveraging their high-potential talent with her new startup, Waypoint Works. I love how she's thinking about high-potential, high-skill people. Previously, Heather was VP of People at Webflow. Heather, welcome.
Thank you so much, Andy. I'm excited to finally be on the pod. I've been listening and it's great.
I love all of our conversations. I'm excited to just kind of go deep in a couple areas. Maybe just to kick it off, you've advised so many companies on hiring talent. You probably have like more data points than almost anybody else. I'm curious, what are some of the mistakes people make in hiring exec talent? You must have like, oh, don't go down that path.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's a lot. I'd say one of the biggest mistakes people make is they just start interviewing potential candidates and almost form the role around the person as opposed to defining what the requirements are for the role. If you were building a product, you wouldn't just start building features because a customer asked or because you met someone who said that's a good idea. You would really sort of do some discovery and figure out what the next 24 months look like in your business and what this person is actually going to solve, and then start to find who might be a match. It's totally fine to meet someone and get inspired by pulling a role forward, but get really clear on the requirements first.
I love it. Does that end up just resulting in more bad hires? If somebody falls in love with a candidate, they say, wow, this person is just so compelling, we've got to get him into the business.
Yeah, and that could be an okay thing. It's just shiny object syndrome. It's the key roles. So like, let's say you have like a VP of marketing gap on your team and you're going to hire your first one and you just so happen to meet someone who's outstanding VP of marketing. Like, of course you want to find a seat for them on the bus, but is the time right? Is the role right? Do you have a clear idea of what they're going to do for the next really 24 months? And what is the objective of the role so that you're designing a role that actually makes sense for the person? And then now go back, does that person actually make sense for the role from today and 24 months later? I think so often, again, the shiny object syndrome is a real one. And I don't blame people. It's really easy to get excited about capabilities and chemistry, but to really be intentional because this is like a pretty long-term relationship you're building.
I couldn't agree more. At SignalFire, when you folks, honestly, if there was a role and you talked to the company and scoped it and helped them, that's one thing. But did you ever say, wow, we have this amazing candidate, we just need to introduce him to the company? Or did you avoid that because of this shiny object syndrome that you...
Yeah, I think often I would frame it a little differently. of saying like, hey, you should always be recruiting, always be meeting great talent. You may not have a role at this point, but you should just get to know this person because they are an excellent representative of this kind of a function. And whether they could be an advisor to your current team or an executive for down the road, just someone you should meet. And then sometimes a role will get created as a result. But you sort of know in the back of your mind, like you can push on things and kind of understand, like, are they thinking through all the details before someone signs on? Again, both sides need to really be thinking this through. And the great thing about executive hiring is generally executives also have their own process. They're trying to figure out what the right match is for them. So a strong executive will also be assessing, what does this role look like 24 months from now?
I'm excited to get into some of that. But
yeah,
I always guide people like, you want to really win the offer before you start asking those questions. Do you ever see execs take themselves out too early in a process with the questions they ask?
Yeah, I think people can kind of skip some steps and jump ahead or create conditions to where they make themselves feel like really like rarefied air. And then as a result, almost don't even open up the right conversation. I think both sides should always be curious up front, but also have a rubric in the back of their mind of like, what do we actually need in this person, and kind of balance both of those things at the same time without closing themselves off. It's a careful dance, basically. It's not this easy cut and dry set of rules that you create.
Yeah, you're right. It's like I almost love when we hop on these podcasts, we don't over prep for them. Every time someone says, give me a prep call. And sometimes people ask, like, how do I win interviews or how do I succeed? Is like the number one rule. And we just had a really fun discussion around this with all of our Whisper members. So it's like, how do you get from silver medal to gold medal? You've got to be yourself. You've got to stand out. And if you're always like looking and following other people's rules, I think it's tough.
Yeah.
I know how passionate you are and how deeply you've thought about high slope talent. I'd be curious, kind of what do you define it as? And then when you're designing an exec role, how often do you encourage companies to look within before they look without?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would define high slope talent as individuals whose pace of growth outpaces or paces with the growth of the business.
Mhm.
And so when you look at kind of most people hit like this y-intercept essentially where they're growing, everyone's growing on some kind of slope. But at some point, if you're in a high growth business, the business is going to surpass you and you're going to hit this intersection to where you have to either be topped by a more senior executive, or you might be pushed out of the business to get someone who might fit the next stage of growth better. High slope talent are the people who are keeping the pace of the business, potentially even extending the pace of the business themselves through the changes that they make. And they have certain traits that allow them to be very successful on that front.
What are those traits? Like, I'm fascinated. How do you identify these people?
Yeah, I call it PEAKS traits. So I made an acronym because I like the mountain for slope as the metaphor. So P is like persistence. This is a person who, and the other, not just has persistence, floors you with the persistence that they would take. What do they like? They go to finish what they start, to get things done. When the thing seems impossible, they keep going. And then I would say E is emotional grounding. So this is that self-awareness, that ability to say, I'm going to put my own ego aside and be steady in the changes and growth of the business. A is action-oriented. I think this is the one that's the easiest to spot. They don't wait for permission. They just do things. They get things done. You never have to worry that they're not going to identify problems and solutions. K is knowledge orientation. So knowledge sponge. They are constantly learning. Pace of learning, I think, is one of the biggest predictors for both founders and executives, I would say, is if you can keep up and grow and learn and apply what you learn, that to me is a key thing. And then lastly, is systems orientation. So can you put it all together? Can you see the forest for the trees? Do you see the thing in front of you that is needed for the business today and can like get in the weeds and do that if needed, but also zoom out to the 30,000 foot view and understand where is this business going and what kinds of systems we need to build within the organization itself. And if you put all those together, someone can be spiking in 3 of them and they're going to be a pretty high potential performer, but to be truly high slope, you need to have all 5.
Do people get confused by any of those? I've always heard like charisma. We had Kyle from Owner on, and he talked about charisma and the ability is like, it's very attractive with salespeople, but
Yeah.
it can also fool you and it may not actually be the right thing to do. Are there ways that people get confused and are like, wow, that person's super high potential and they're not?
Yeah, 100%, especially in sales. I think sales is some of the hardest to interview for because they have as the kids would say, riz, right? So I think if you think about it, charisma was nowhere in the 5 things I just named. In fact, some of the best workers are some of the worst interviewers. And so you have to really understand how not to get, again, shiny object syndrome is also in the way people are likable. All the data shows that if you are likable, if you are attractive, even there are things that will make people interview you more favorably with no validity to it. And so you have to get really good at kind of thinking through your structured interviewing and what kind of questions are you asking? Because if you're just going in for, I'm going to have a casual conversation, get to know the person, you're going to get blindsided potentially with their actual capabilities when they're in the seat. And so at least having some semblance of structured questions that you are going to ask and some semblance of a rubric of what you're really assessing for to make sure that you are truly validating, does this person have the things that I need in the role that I've designed? So if you take it from know the requirements for the role and think about the next 24 months. And now as you ask questions, you should be assessing for can they do these things over the next, and not how much they wow you. And for what it's worth, I think charisma can be an important trait for a sales leader, a commercial leader. They are meeting with people, especially in these business development oriented roles where you're out in the field. But make it a competency and name it and know how you name it. Don't make it the whole thing so that it's kind of rosy glasses.
I like that. Now, when you said charisma's not in the bucket, I started thinking what else is in the bucket that I would look for. The two was one is EQ.
Yeah.
Is that in the bucket or not? And the other one is like leadership ability. I'm
Yeah.
curious how are those things. Do you need those things in a high slope person, or do you feel like they
Yeah.
can grow those things?
Yeah, so the E in peaks is emotional grounding, which is essentially
Ah,
EQ.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I didn't use EQ only because I think that that's a buzzwordy term at times that can get kind of like misunderstood. To me, it's sort of, are you self-aware? And then are you self-managed? So do you know, you don't need to have it all. You just need to know what you have and what you don't have. And then you need to be able to like surgically manage yourself against those gaps or deficiencies so that you can show up. And in leadership, especially, I think that's part of leadership is knowing no person is going to be majors at everything. You've got majors, you've got minors. Like, what are your minors? And where do you want to fill around yourself and have the lower ego to give something away to someone who's going to do it better than you? And I think that's a huge piece of it. Nobody leads alone. And then in terms of leadership, I think like I would ask you, like, how do you define leadership? I think there's so many definitions of it, but I would say it's all of those traits combined. And ultimately, how do you align a group of people to want to work with you and follow you towards a shared vision? And that's really systems thinking. Like it's the execution on the system itself and bringing people there. So influence for sure is a huge part of leadership, but I think you can be high slope and be an individual contributor too.
I like that. I reflect back on one of my best hires. I almost had to fire this person at 30 days because they had so many ideas and they were throwing it at everyone, but they were telling all the other people how bad their ideas were. And you're like, but able
Yeah.
to take the feedback, it was so much better. And
But
in
they were
leadership,
coachable, right? Like you
yes, well, because it was
yeah.
a very hard sit down walk. I don't think what I was actually saying really ever sunk in, but if you don't correct this will be a very short tenure sunk in. And this person, then I just kept moving them around and moving them around. And I was really impressed. But I think leadership is, to me, I guess I feel like you can learn leadership. I don't know about you, but I think a lot of us make
Yeah.
mistakes early in career and we're like, oh, I wasn't a good leader here, but I can get better. I think at Box, when I did it, I just didn't make the hard calls on the people and I didn't build in like those directors that could give you amplification. But over time you learn. I
Yeah.
think some people have the ability to learn it, some people don't. So it's a harder one to figure out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, leadership is super subjective and it's super contextual. And depending on how you subscribe to leadership, I think different companies would say different things would be true of someone who's a leader. And like, for example, making hard decisions, like how do you define a hard decision and what's the appropriate thing in that context? I think really what it comes down to is a great leader, regardless of the functional expertise, is somebody who is, again, that self-awareness and self-management's got to be there. And then they've got to figure out how to use that and then also be other aware and other managed to figure out how do you actually get the people around you aligned to the same total outcome and really making sure that the outcome you're aligning to the decisions that you're making aren't just what's right for you and pushing your ideas, it's pushing what's right for the business and even having the capability to understand what that is by really hearing out everyone else's ideas. So like the person you mentioned who they were telling everyone else's ideas that they were bad and they had a million of their own, it's sort of like, how can they almost learn through failure? And like, does that mean leadership? You know, like even like letting them see that none of your ideas are getting across. Why do you think that is? And almost coaching them to kind of get there and see it for themselves. But sometimes you just have to tell people because there's no time to do the coaching process at every turn.
I agree. So maybe I'd be curious. We definitely had a phenomenal high. We call it hypo or high potential or high slope at Box. They did a really good job of finding those people, moving around the business. I'd be
Yeah.
curious how you think companies should develop and nurture this high potential talent.
Yeah. I think so. The person itself is only half the battle. If you're a high slope person, you can only be successful in a company or organizational setting that actually fosters that.
Agreed.
And I think so. The first thing companies need to understand is: are we going after this strategy? Because you can absolutely go after a strategy with only proven. I've seen this movie 3 times before. Executives. There are upsides to that and there are downsides to that. And I would argue that the downsides are much greater. And so again, are you going to choose this strategy? And then also, what's your mix going to be? And it's not obviously like this systematic surgical thing where for this role, we're going for this and this role, we're going for that, but kind of broadly across the org, you want to have sorts of like people at different levels in their career and at different paces of growth so that they can all find each other and people can pull each other up because everything happens in a team. And so like I'd say org design is a main consideration for a team in this place. I think the second piece would be, what are our cultural values? So now that we've got the people on the bus, like whether you are intentional about naming these values or not, like there is a culture at your organization that is happening. And it's almost worse when it's not what you name it to be. So, these companies that I'll say like, oh, we're doing this 996 thing. And everyone's like, oh, that's horrible. Like, how could you do that? Would I join that culture? No. But would I rather know that's a culture I'm joining than join something where that's the expectation, but it's not being named? Absolutely not. Right. So like, how do your cultural values exist and how are they aligned to what's actually happening in practice? And how do they call in or push out people who are on a high slope trajectory? Because high slope, high potential people are not easy to manage. These are people who are going to push your boundaries, right? They're action oriented. They're going to beg for forgiveness, not ask for permission. And so you're going to end up having some messiness and some management of that. And they're going to bring up problems to you. They're going to tell you all the things that are wrong in your organization. They're challenging to work with in this way. And so
Yes.
like, what kind of cultural values do you have that actually honor that? And then how do you channel it in for good? So like bring us problems, but also bring us solutions when you do. Like what are the kinds of things that you're naming across your org and how do you foster it through your systems? I think that's the hardest part actually is companies thinking that they can just do like piecemeal strategies to bring on certain kinds of talent and just think that they're going to work out in your org. There will be rejection of the organ if your systems don't kind of support the people that you're bringing on.
I could not agree more. Everyone's probably sitting there saying, high slope talent, of course we want it.
Who doesn't?
But if you don't have the ability for people to drive change across orgs, you're right about these people. Like they will be messy. They will challenge you. They will push you. They will tell you you're stupid. They'll tell you your org doesn't work. I guess they just need to tell it to you in a positive way rather than a negative way. So there's that. But I like that. Yeah, I could see how many orgs are not ready for it if you're slow and applauding org no matter what. I also like your point on values is good. We talked a lot about it at Culture Amp because we help 10,000 companies do it. The one thing we always believed was a value is not a value if there's not the con, right? So we work really hard 996. There is a con to that value. We take ownership there is no like, we don't take ownership. There's no con to that. And so we saw a lot of companies that had values that were not real values. They were like fake values. And we always would try to coach them on that. But
like
I think
words on
that's
the
almost
wall.
important. It's like have your values at edge, have them be potential that people could disagree with them because that will create the right culture for you as well.
Everyone wants to copy Netflix, but what Netflix did well is that they pushed some people away. They were controversial. And I think that controversiality, is that the word, is the right thing for a lot of businesses to say, we're not for everyone, but this is who we are for. And then how do you use that to then call in this high slope type of a person? But also you have to live it. That's the harder part. You could say you want it, but it's not easier. And so if you're choosing this harder path, like how are you truly going to honor it? And that means hearing the feedback. I heard a story, this is, I guess, in a Culture Amp related thing. They had an employee engagement survey and then the results started coming through and the leadership was like, these scores are not fair. Like you should be thinking of a 7 as like a passive and therefore like almost trying to lead the participants midway through a survey cycle. And it's like, if you don't want to hear the hard feedback, like if you're trying to just like get all positivity and you don't want to hear any of the negativity, you're not going to solve any of the problems. And so I think the hardest thing is for leadership to understand that when you bring in this type of talent, you're going to face more conflict, you're going to face more run-ins, but you're also going to face way more growth. So you have to be ready to support both and you have to be ready to listen to the stuff that they say and not just say, oh, you gave me a 6 because your expectations are really high. That's not okay. And like, what does it actually look like?
How do you know when somebody's too needy? And because so yes, there is high slope, but there are people that can't turn off. Maybe this is to your in peaks. But there are some people where you're like, God, that person's just, they're high slope in so many ways, but they're still a cancer to the organization. Like, how do you identify those people that you should reject?
Well, to be high slope, you have to be self-aware and self-managed. And so for me, I think of like Daniel Pink's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if you're familiar with this concept of people are most successful in jobs when they feel a sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think those really align well to the slope concept. So first of all, does your job align to something that's core to the mission, to what they're doing is actually important? So if they're just needy because they're just saying all these problems, like it's a distraction from the core of the business. But if they're aligned with the sense of purpose, that's going to be met, right? So it's already going to be things that they're naming should be important things. And then mastery, do they have the skills to actually solve the problems? Do they have the skills to actually do the work that's required? So they might bring you a million ideas or complaints or concerns, but are they actually going to go back and own them with a sense of mastery that they know how to solve them too, and they can work through that? Are they making you aware and then taking accountability to say, but I'm going to help fix this. I'm going to help correct this. And then I think the autonomy piece is, are your systems set up so that you're not the blocker from it? Because if they're bringing you stuff and it's like now on your plate suddenly, you have not delegated effectively as a leader to get people across the team to take ownership over solving their own problems. In HR, it's really easy. People bring you their complaints about their managers, and it's really easy to be like, I'll go talk to him for you. No, I'm not going to talk to him for you, right? Like, you're going to go solve it, and let me coach you how to solve it with the person directly, or else you make yourself the bottleneck and the sticking point on everything that happens. So if leadership thinks that somebody is too needy, either they're not aligned with their problems that they're bringing to the business goal itself. It's a lack of focus, and now it's a distraction. That's the feedback you give.
Or you're feeding the beast, right? Like, oh, let me solve that problem for you versus no, like go take care of it yourself.
You've got to get out of the way, because if they are truly high slope, they're going to solve their own problem. They're going to work through the systems and figure it out. If they can't do it, they need you to do it. That's not a high slope leader.
So let's talk about the question that I hear on like tons of podcasts other than ours, which is every company wants. So I think for like lead, manager, director, I'm with you. Right now, what we're talking about is a VP level hire, for example. You hear a lot of people like, oh, I don't want those people to run the playbook 3 times. I want the young, hungry person. But how do you pick between those two? And when do you grow your own from your own high slope people versus when do you hire externally?
This is such an important and challenging and messy and beautiful question. So I would say one is why, right? Like, what are they going to be doing? Going back to the original requirements, like what are the top objectives of the role? What are the top outcomes you want to see of the role in the next 24 months? And why would it be beneficial to have someone who has the playbook or someone who doesn't have the playbook? Are you trying to do things differently or not? And to understand really, like, what is your business strategy and how would a certain profile best align to that? And then I think 2 is like, what's your total team construction?
Yes.
So I'd always bias towards the up and comer when possible, because they're going to be probably a little hungrier to prove themselves. This is their big chance to do the big job. And somebody who's done it 3 times, they're probably kind of tired potentially. They might not be. Some people can go forever and they will, but they've got a sense of like, this is the right way or the wrong way. And so the person who's more up and coming, they're still figuring it out. There's like a best of both worlds that I'd like to see, which is to pair the up and comer with an experienced advisor. And I don't think enough companies do this, where you keep that either on the internal person that's, already in seat, or you hire somebody for whom this is going to be a step up job, but they are all the signals are green, that they are high peaks, right? High slope person, and that they have the fire in them to do this job and to throw their all into it. And then you pair them with the expert who has the playbook or the one who is past the playbook and they think outside the box, and give them like equity ownership in the company to spend some time with this person on a regular basis and grow them through a mix of both worlds. Like, I don't know why more companies don't do that.
I do it actually with a couple like really rock star directors that are not part of Whisper that have just asked me like, hey, can you be like my career sounding board, both on like playbooks, because there are so many things that you just don't see in go-to-market, which have been done before and invented before. You shouldn't bang your head at them. Like, it shocked me when I showed up at one company, there was more than 300 million in revenue and they'd never seen what pipeline coverage was. I'm like, oh my God, like, how could they not? And so I think I do this for a couple people that I care deeply about. Sometimes I'll do it for a bono, but increasingly I'm kind of like, no, like, let's
Don't say that out loud here. People will ask you for it.
Oh, they ask all the time, right? Yeah. But it's like, you can tell, like, there are also people that I feel okay mentoring because they're just really sincere and great people. And then there's, maybe I should charge them a little bit.
Well, and especially in RevOps and in related areas, like, the world has changed really fast. So the person who's done it 18 times over, unless they are high slope, right? So the knowledge sponge, like somebody you're like this, like, I see how you run Whisper, like, you are taking advantage of every possible capability AI has to offer. Most seasoned professionals who have been an executive 3 times over aren't necessarily doing that. They might even be a little skeptical. They might be in a wait and see mode. And so if you're trying to run things, again, this is a perfect example, run things differently, Do you want the up and comer who is so immersed in everything that's happening in AI, and you pair them with an advisor who can see the forest for the trees, who understands, yes, I know the tools that are out there. Let me advise you on some of these things that are new and upcoming that you should test out. But like, here's where I wouldn't mess with it. Like, I think it's just like an answer that ChatGPT or Claude can spit out at you. Like, if you know what great looks like and you have discretion, you're going to know which is good idea, bad idea, like which one you want to listen to. Sometimes like, no, Claude, like that was wrong. You got this wrong. Like, let's talk about what went wrong here. And I try to almost coach it on the correct answer because I was trying to save time by using it, not necessarily be told what to do. But then there are topics that I don't know, and I don't know if it's right or not. And so if you're an up and comer and you're trying to use new AI technology, but you don't know really what good looks like in that thing because you're a first timer, you could get into trouble. So I think, again, this is where that advisor pairing could go really well.
Oh man, if some company said to me, hey, here's $2,000 a month that you can spend, because I'd had those exec coaches, you are one now. And like I've spent, the $300-$400 an hour on an exec coach, and it's so valuable. And I know there are companies that do it, but if some company said to me like, hey, you're an up and comer, we know we're taking a bet on you, we're going to go out and give you $2,000 a month we will work with you to find the advisor. And I've done that a couple of times for people that work for me. I think that would be a huge attraction for somebody. It also might be a retention thing too, because if I leave the company, I lose the $2,000 for my advisor and my mentor type thing.
Well, and it's just a signal. Like everything is a signal to candidates. Everything you do when you're trying to close candidates is signal. And one of those things is offering them extended support and resources to ensure that they're going to be successful. It's a win-win for everybody involved. So yes, I mean, if you're a seed, Series A, Series B company and you don't have the cash to shell out for an executive coach, you could do an equity advisor kind of consideration. And if you're Series B plus and now equity is the premium, shell out the cash and hire somebody to physically be your coach/advisor.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, how do you identify candidates that are tired? We had a really fun discussion on how do companies assess AI fluency for more experienced candidates. It was a really, really good one where we had like a rubric and everything like that. But I'm curious, like, what are those signal flags where you're picking them up and being like, okay, that candidate, they're good. They probably have some good playbooks. They've got an impressive background, but they're tired. And they may not run up that hill again. And so they were high slope, but they're no longer. Like, how do you figure out those?
Yeah. When people tell you who they are, you have to believe them. That's actually the biggest challenge I see is like someone got excited about a resume. They're on a place, they're coming from a place of yes, like a prove me wrong, not prove me right. And then you interview and they're going to say things like every time. I mean, every time I interview, candidates will tell you what stage of life they are in. They let you know. Whether it's in the questions or not, they let you know. And so you want to look for those signals. And some of them are verbal, like they're going to say, hey, I'm looking for a change of pace after that last run. That was an exhausting run. They'll tell you these things. They're looking for the change. Sometimes it's in pushback on the process itself. Like if they take a really long time to get back to you on emails or on a take-home assignment or whatever else, or they try to extend a process. Now, sometimes they're fully employed and they're really focused there and that's all it is. But sometimes there's no excuse. You can see the fire when someone's inside and understand it. And you can also ask questions for it too. So tell me the last time you faced burnout. What did that look like? What was happening? If you're familiar with top grading as an interview strategy, you can do what was your high point and low point in every job and go through it. And then when you hear the examples that they sound like maybe they burn out easy or it's really just been grueling, have an honest conversation. Like, where are you at now? You never want to kind of misequate age or number of runs with someone's energy. I think there are some people that are hardwired to run no matter what. Like they are ultra marathoners. Exactly. You are one of them. And then there are people who are not. And it doesn't take a certain number of runs or years. Everyone's kind of built differently. So you just have to really look for the signals if that's an important trait. And it probably should be for everyone. And then figure out, like, there's other things too. Like, how much are they going to want to hire around them from the start? Like, how much is that a focus of how hands-off they're going to be versus hands-on? Like, you want to understand, again, scope out what this role is, scope out what the resourcing for it is, and then really get clear what can we afford to do. So if someone might be more hands-off and has all the know-how and knowledge, but they're going to be hands-off, they're going to cost a lot, they might use a playbook, they might be slower, when is that the appropriate strategy? And you might say never, but you might have a use case for it. And then when are you willing to take a risk? Like, when is it not actually brain surgery that you're doing by hiring someone who could mess up something? And how do you mitigate those risks through things like advisory or coaching? And then across your team, how do you have a balanced slate? Because some skills are functionally agnostic. Some skills are being a good executive is about influence and leadership. And how do you have really strong cultural like mentors on that. And the more junior up and coming person might have better leadership traits and more skilled leadership runs because of where they've been and where they've worked and how they've worked than the super experienced person. So as long as the super experienced person's open-minded and sees the strengths across, you can have almost like cross-generational mentorship happening in your org if you build it right. So I think it's about keying in for like the diversity of your team in every semblance of the word, but especially in thinking about like what is everyone going to bring uniquely to this mishmash recipe of an executive team? And then as a CEO, especially, like how do you align the group to get on the same page and ensure that the values and culture that you are trying to push are carried through all of them naturally, not forced, because it's going to like permeate the entire organization, not just that leadership team. So I know it's a broad, fuzzy concept to think about, but you're essentially building like almost like your own little NFL team. And you need to have different types of people playing different kinds of roles. Like the guy who's going to be your center is not the same guy who's going to be your wide receiver. Like it's just not how it works. And culturally, like what does that look like? But because at the end of the day, I'm a Chiefs fan, this might get me in trouble, but like there's chemistry there as a team. And when you see them come together and it's magic and you see Patrick Mahomes like not even look over his shoulder and like throw it ball to Kelsey at like the 1 yard line, like how does that even happen? Like that's a culture that's been built up on a team and chemistry. And that is above any functional expertise or years of experience. And it takes people who are self-aware, team-oriented. Like that's really what leadership is. So I'm done with my
I love it. So you had three thoughts that kicked off for me. One is I had a woman that worked for me, Tori, whose husband plays for the Titans. He's probably like later in the career, but he knows every play. He's not the biggest lineman. He's not whatever, but he's like knows every piece of it. And so I think you do need different people. You made a point on getting back fast, which I think is one of my favorite networking tips. I had a guy be like, Andy, I know you're good at networking. How do I get there? And I said to this guy, X, you just never reply. And it's like, if I matter to you, reply. And if I don't matter to you, don't. And I take that view. It's just like people either matter or they don't to me. And if they matter, they will hear from me immediately. And he would be like 5 months without replying. And like, he took that feedback and then he was like, boom, CEO. And he dropped me up the other day of like, thank you so much on that one.
In all your examples, coachability is the thing that you value. So what I'm hearing is people aren't perfect. Like you were describing respond fast, that's action orientation. Like that's part of peaks. High skill people, they respond fast. They're action oriented. They just get things done. They get them out of the way. Like imperfections are okay because it's about keep moving and being iterative. But if somebody lacks something, high slope or not, and you give them the feedback and they take it and they grow from it, that's coachability. And so like separate from the high slope conversation, this is like a baseline thing that I think so many people misunderstand when they're hiring. Nobody is perfect from the start. There's always going to be gaps in anyone that you bring onto your team. What you want to see across every single person you hire and manage is coachability. Because if they don't have that, they don't react to the feedback, it's going to get really hard when the feedback keeps happening and nothing changes. Like that's when terminations happen. Is we've given the feedback 18 times, nothing's changed, they got to go. But even if they're not perfect, if they understand what they have to work on and then you resource them to work on it through coaching, through advising, through whatever, you can make magic happen. And people that might have seemed like mid-tier performers, you find out actually have a very steep slope inside of them. They just needed to be like awoken within them in this high trust environment where they were told the hard thing, but it was the kind thing to say.
I love it. And you probably be curious how, because you probably talk to tons and tons of candidates, but I'm always incredibly direct, right? And you can tell how they handle that. Like you do not need to take my advice. You just need to hear it. And I think I'll often give people like some really direct advice and I want to see how they handle that. So I think subtly we've been kind of screening within Whispered for, are you high slope or not without realizing it, which is really cool.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, slope sees slope. So if that's how you operate, like you're going to look for people that are like-minded to those value set. Because I mean, ultimately, all the slope things are values. Persistence is a value. Knowledge orientation, knowledge sponge is a value. Like these are people want to learn. They're curious. Like they're all ultimately things that you can believe or not believe, and that's going to dictate how much you do them.
Yeah, I liked it. We had a huddle on Friday, and we were talking about ageism. Right, because people, and I'm big on its levelism on ageism, but one member who's maybe my age now, he said, "Hey, I get it. When I was 35 and I was interviewing people older than me, I had my flag up, but I didn't have it up for age. I had it up for rigidity." And I thought that was really, I was like, "Wow, you just said it so well." So if you come across as this is my playbook, I need to run my playbook, I am this person. it has nothing to do with age. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure some people may judge by the gray hairs or by that, but ideally they're seeing past that. But they are judging for rigidity, which as you get older, we often do get a little bit more set in our ways. And
But
so
I know
those,
25-year-olds who are pretty rigid too. So like I think that's the key. So I believe like every executive hire should be interviewed based on competency-based interviewing. What are the 6 to 8 things that this person must have? And if what you're looking for is say, like a lack of rigidity, so like flexibility, adaptability, name it, and then figure out what can I ask or do to assess it? What does good look like? What does great look like? And what does like jaw-dropping, floor you to the ground look like? And then how do you not settle until you get to that? And what are the things that you would see as examples? Like the time, and you can ask questions that are aligned to it. So tell me about a time you made an unpopular decision because you knew it was right. And then you get to the answer from what the person says and you hear the rigidity in their thinking. And now did they force their way into the unpopular decision? Or was it actually that everyone is wrong, including them, and they came around too? Like, what can you see in this person that allows you to realize this is a person who I'm going to want to have hard conversations with because they're going to help everybody see differently and they're open to new ideas and all that. So, I mean, those are just like one example. I know you always ask folks on the podcast what their favorite interview question is, and I don't want to supersede it. That's
no. I was where I was
not
going next. Yeah.
okay, guys. Like I just read your mind. When you asked other folks, I loved all the questions that I heard, and then I thought mine's just so much simpler than that. The very first question I ask in the first interview, and the very last question I ask in the first interview, tell me almost everything I need to know to close the person in the end, and to understand a lot of competencies about them and how they approach it, not what they say.
I'm excited
So
to hear what the question is. I know what mine. If you
yeah,
get me
yeah,
that
yeah.
prompt, I know what I would answer, but I want to hear yours.
And they're not rocket science. That's the wildest part. So the first question I ask on every interview when I'm interviewing for my own team or for anyone is, why this role? Why this company? Why now?
Hmm.
So often you start with like small talk and tell me about yourself. And then the person goes on like a 19-minute diatribe about their background and you don't need it. You saw their resume. What that gives you is like more of what you kind of already know and really nothing new. What you're looking for is signal to noise. And so I'm asking those 3 questions because I want to know, do they understand the role? Like this is a chance to align what the role really is. And do they want this role? Do they understand what the company really does? And do they want this company, not just like a company in our space or whatever else? And do they understand the moment that we're at in the business and what's coming and what's next? And do they want to be a part of that next moment? And not only does this help you understand their intent, their interest, it allows you to see how they think because you gave them a very structured question and how fast they can answer, how they communicate. It shows you how much research they did on the business, how much they understand already. It shows you how they process information. And bonus points, should you want to hire them at the end, you have a script for what you need to say to sell them. Because you can go back, if you're not the highest comp, if you're not the highest title or the most compelling, stock options package, you can say, you told me on the first call that you wanted us because of this. Does that company give you this, that other opportunity that you have? And ideally, they've given you something that's so specific and unique that got you excited that you can go back to the core of the thing. It's like this opportunity-based sell of the opportunity, the why now, what we're doing now, what you get to be a part of. And let's call it $20K difference. Sure. Like at the end of the day, that's like a difference of like $1,000 in your paycheck every month. Is that really worth it for this, which you said is what you were looking for in this opportunity, right? And so that's the first question. And then the second question, same thing. So at the very end of every interview, everyone asks this, what questions do you have for me?
Yes.
I think it's the most important question in the interview because the
Oh,
answer they
yes.
give tells you everything. If they say, I think I have all my questions answered, I'm done. If that you're not curious, you don't have more, I'm done. Or if you ask a question that could have been answered on our website, on the homepage or on the services, I'm done. Like, I want to know, what do you really care about? Did you do your homework? Do you have thoughtful questions? How do you even ask questions? Because your ability to ask questions is so crucial to the business. And what they ask about, hopefully they're not just saying things to sound smart. They're asking questions they actually care about. So now I can go in and use this to sell back my opportunity right to them in that moment. So you're selling at every point as you answer their questions back too. And then by the end, it's really easy because you've had this 2-way conversation the whole way through with their questions and yours, and you know why they want to join, and you just put a whole bow on it so that when you give the offer, you say, so excited, but I want to tell you why. And then you name the alignment between the person and the opportunity so that it's so obvious. And you say all of that before you ever mention comp. And so when you get to comp, it's like this person should feel 11 out of 10 they want to join the company pending comp is aligned. And now if it's a few thousand off, like that's not a big deal. And so to me, those questions give a two-way street that no other questions really give.
God, I love it. We have this, there's a great one, Mike Weir talks about like no lazy questions, right? Which I'm a bit like, if you have a lazy question, I will know. And it's funny, when you gave the prompt on what your question was, I literally asked the same thing both ways. At the beginning, what questions do you have? Because I actually preface it to give them more time. I'm like, first question, like, what questions do you have? Especially if I'm the hiring manager. And then I'll say like, I will literally spend the entire interview on this because it helps me understand how you think. Because I think a smart candidate, like I may never even go to your first question. I may just do that. Like I'm fine completely going off script if a smart candidate has done their work and really wants to dive into the business. But I love how you do it and tie it to the offer. Okay, so I've got a fun question. I think I may have heard on a couple podcasts that your name and MetaView connected. We talked a little bit about this.
No one has made me famous.
No one has made you famous. So we've talked about how you're using data from one part of the interview in a different part. Do you use the technology? It was funny because we had a talent partner dinner the other day where very few of the talent partners actually use the recording technology because of all the compliance reasons and things like that. But do you use the technology to be able to link these things together?
Yeah. So we were they are still. I was a MetaView customer at SignalFire. I purchased them and used it for my interviews. And the team still does, as far as I know. It's only been 2 months since I left, so I assume they still do. And so, yes, use the technology. For me, the technology, absolutely, there's a data source there. And I think I listened to, I'm trying to remember which of the episodes, someone was using MetaView and they were going to go back and do a big like macro study of everything, but they didn't use it day to day. Yes. I'm kind of in the same boat. The reason I like to use MetaView especially is to be fully present and actively listening on an interview. Historically, when you get into an interview, my whole spiel that I would give in the beginning is, just so you know, I really care about what you say and I want to remember it. So I take profuse notes. And I was trying to type like direct quotes from the person the whole time. So like, sorry for my weird eye contact, sorry for whatever. And as I'm trying to write what they're saying, I'm going to miss what they're saying next because I can't type as fast as they can talk. And so ultimately, what ends up happening is you hear a good thing, but you might have missed 3 other good things and you're not really listening. So you're having this like sadder level of conversation with the other person because you're trying to capture what they say, or you don't capture what they say. You're super present, but then you get to the end and you're like, I don't remember what just happened here. I liked them. I don't know like what the answer to that question or how, because it's hard. And then you're running to another meeting and there's no time to capture all your notes. So for me, MetaView, and it's gone, right? But for talent,
it's gone for interviews. Yeah, exactly.
And I remember when I think it was like 2016, I was at Rainforest QA back then, and the sales team every Friday would sit and listen to gong calls. That's what we used to do. It was like an early product then. And we would sit and everyone would take turns and the whole sales team would listen to one rep's call and everyone would pause and critique. It was this wild experience. Maybe it was 2017, wild experience. And I kept thinking, could we make everyone do this for interviewing? And this was like way before it existed. And so I think that's really the joy of it, is less just in data collection and more in education and more in like macro data view, day to day. Absolutely. It's great to have a record to go back to, but like I use Granola. I don't know what you use for note taking, but like I don't look at my Granola notes unless I forget something that was said, and then I'll go back and ask and like look at them. It's just more of that source of truth that we've all been missing for so long before AI, as more than it is like a systematic thing for me. But I wasn't recruiting full time. I was doing recruiting in a small portion of the day. If I was doing it full time, I might have a more systematic approach.
I love how you saw the power of going early. I wrote an article in 2015 when I was at Box around how do you manage a sales team without voice when it didn't exist? So I met Gong and Chorus then, and I had to fight with compliance to get them in.
Right.
I think the interesting difference between like Gong and MetaView is, as a sales manager, you're going to listen to the people and you need to know where that is in funnel in a different way, I think, than you do with MetaView. I think for me, it's like the ability to tie one earlier stage interview, which you did, to a later one. The other one I've heard is, hey, like, tell me, like, some of the top grading stuff around, tell me, like, when you worked here, how did it go? Who'd you work well with? And you're picking those up for the reference stages later, right? So I think that there are probably products that people can do some of this thinking in better ways on this stuff. But I love, it's like, there are those points, but I agree with you. Like, no one's going back and doing it. I am a paper person. You see me taking notes. I've actually found that if I take notes, I'm a better listener.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I take notes.
Yeah, I mean, I still take some notes too. Especially if I'm like nervous, something will get captured in the summary, and then I want to make sure it does. And so, yeah, 100%. I think you have to figure out what system works for you and use it. And nothing changes with AI in that. It's which system works for you. And so, 100%. And I think if you don't have access to MetaView, but you do have access to Gong, I wonder if you could, as a company, use Gong just for your interview, like just reapply. I mean, my first access to LinkedIn Recruiter, quote unquote, was actually LinkedIn Sales Navigator because we'd already bought it for the team and I didn't want to start a new contract. And so I was using Navigator to try to like source people. So I think like a lot of these tools can be like cross-pollinated if done thoughtfully.
Well, it's every sales ops team at every company will tell you about the pings they get from recruiters saying, "Can you remove that call?" HR was a constant friend of my team because we couldn't give them access, but we could delete calls, so we would do that very frequently when internal HR conversations ended up on Gong.
Oh, that's the most frightening. That's actually like my biggest horror story. Yeah.
Yes, especially if you get like a harassment or something like that. You're like, "Okay, we gotta get
Yeah.
that one out." Okay, so along with high slope, the other one we always love to ask is, which we've been starting to ask more and more, is like, do you and how do you assess AI fluency? Which I think is, it's no longer enough to know how to put something into ChatGPT. And so like, I'm curious, is that a part of interviews for companies you worked with? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's helpful if you have an infrastructure around it. So I think Zapier actually has a really good kind of like basis level thing that they put out in open source, which is like their levels of competency. So first, like, what does it look like to be AI fluent? Like define that first, and then have indicators of what that means you do at each turn. I think if you don't have that built into your systems as a company yet, you could either borrow what they have and just try to apply it for the interview time being, or you could, just ask a really simple question that I start with. So I was interviewing for a role on my team just before I left SignalFire, and I wanted someone who had AI fluency because everything that we do is AI centric, and we have, unlike a lot of VCs, carte blanche opportunity to really play and experiment and use everything. So I wanted people that wanted that because that's what the team's culture is. And so I asked everybody, tell me what are one or two, maybe even two or three if you're not sure they're going to get there, AI tools that you use regularly, and how do you use them? And it's so simple, but it catches everybody off guard who's not using them all because they have no examples. And so without fail, like the worst answer was, oh, I'm not allowed to, so I don't really. Like, what about your personal life? Like, name it. If you're
Yeah.
like, last VC wasn't allowing you to, like, how about personally? And I would push back and then they'd be like, well, oh, I guess I probably should. And I'm like, okay, that's a red for me. And then the kind of yellow layer is, oh yeah, I love ChatGPT. I use it all the time. I use it to help me write my emails. I'm like, okay, so does my mom. So like if someone in their late 60s does, like let's get it going. And like me too, like that's an answer, but like give me more. And that's why I say like one or two. Do you have another one? And then level 3 would be yes and. Like I have it. These are the ones I'm using lately. This is how I'm using them. And then lately I've been experimenting with X. So like a pro for me would be like on the far end is they could rattle off a bunch and how they were using them. And they were all common use cases, but there was some fluency there. And kind of an eagerness to play and be curious and build stuff. So if they mentioned building custom GPTs or using Replit or V0, or whatever we call it for sales product to build their own little apps, like non-technical people still trying to do more because they have this capability now, just the desire to grow and learn. Again, that's that high slope concept. They may not have it all today, but there is clear intent and desire and action orientation towards taking that first step. And so they're showing, not telling, that they have that. They may not have to use the same tools as you use, but there's an openness, I think, that is critical. And then the level of fluency from there is like, how easy can they rattle these things off? And even if you don't have your rubric and your layers all kind of set up, like first pass, just start there and see what you get. I think that's a pretty telling question, actually.
I love that the AI fluency is so powerful. We did a really fun rubric with Captivate Talent around this, where they really talked about how do you do that. And I think I like how you tie it back to the high slope candidates as well too. I think it's interesting on that side.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I feel like we could go into the how do you grow talent, but you've been much more around helping companies find that talent. How do you? Oh, I had one more on the AI fluency. Maybe it's like, we ask everyone that applies to Whispered, like, what company do you want to work for? And 90% of them say OpenAI and Anthropic, right? It's kind of like the du jour thing. But like, don't go interview with those companies if you are not like really rock solid. We've been working with a top 10 AI company, and they basically are like, "What's RAG? How do you do this?" Like, and they are asking,
Mhm.
and I'm just like, "We're not going to send you if you're not like AI
Yeah.
native and can't do that." And so I think people have to have that self awareness. And if I'm going for one of those hot companies, I don't want to be there because the stuff's happening. Like, I need to be speaking this language and doing this too. And so I think a lot of people assume that like it's weird how this is a talent. I'd be curious your take on this. Like
Yeah.
OpenAI and Anthropic feel like they're these weird talent magnets, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm seeing people go that are like VP or directors and senior directors and taking like IC roles. And maybe their businesses turn into $1 trillion companies. Certainly their valuations suggest it. But how would you think about betting your career at this stage on one of these talent magnets? You're clearly working with great people, but do you go to one of those or do you go like the next tier or something else like that? Like how would you if you're making bets for your career, how would you think
As
about
a
that?
candidate?
Yeah, yeah. And sorry it
Yeah.
was a long-winded
Oh,
question. I was
no,
like
no, it
getting to
makes
where I
perfect
was.
sense. No, I think it's really a good, thoughtful thing. I think so candidates get really again, shiny object syndrome goes both ways. So I think people wanna be a part of whatever the hot thing is now, and our old CTO, or he's still a CTO at, SignalFire would say, "The Web3 hucksters are now the AI hucksters." Like, are you chasing trends, or do you have a distinctive interest in this thing? And really, what are you optimizing for in your own career? And so from a candidate perspective, if you're a candidate and you're listening to this, step back and say, what are the 3 most important priorities that I must get out of my next role? And it might be, I want to be at a certain stage of growth company, or I want to have a certain kind of company culture, a certain leader, whatever the thing is that is for you. And it could be compensation, it could be remote work, it could be whatever it is. But name your top 3 and recognize the whole slew of stuff that you're trading off below it. And then try to figure out for each opportunity that you're looking at. So let's call it Anthropic. How does Anthropic align to each of the top 3 priorities that you have? So they'll say, I think it's Sheryl Sandberg's quote in Lean of like, when you're asked to join a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask for a seat, just jump on. That can be true at a certain stage in your career. I think when you're early career, absolutely, because you don't really know what you want. If you're an executive and you're job searching, you know what you want. And so I think it's totally fair to say, I'm optimizing for being at a foundational LLM, major business, and I want to be on the ground floor of this stuff because I'm fascinated by it. I think that's a fair thing to say you want to do and that you're optimizing that kind of business. And then you're not optimizing for title. And therefore, that's just fine, right? But like you should have, just like you have for candidates on the interviewing side, a rubric that you're using to assess opportunities for you too. So what are your top 3 things and what are your top 3 opportunities and how does each actually line up? Because for what it's worth, OpenAI and Anthropic could not be more differently run businesses. So if you are a top candidate for one, you are almost definitely not a top candidate for the other. And so it's like, which one do you actually want to be a part of? And what are your things that you're looking for? And if it's just comp and wanting to be a foundational AI company and you're based in San Francisco and it needs to be there, like if those are your top 3 things, then great, fine, either one works. But almost no one in an executive role is just looking at those things. It goes much deeper. And so like, what are the cultural threads you're looking for? What products do you want to be selling or marketing if you're on the go-to-market side? Like, what are the pieces that are there? Because they're approaching everything very differently from each other. So what's the story you're trying to tell? And now go back and align. And there might be some, like you say, like tier 2, it's not even tier 2, it's just application layer companies that are also culturally aligned to either Anthropic or OpenAI. And now you can go ahead and say, okay, which is my like cohort of companies I want to be targeting based on that. And again, if stage is the thing, like that's the answer. But it's never just like chasing the hot thing, or else you're going to get really lost with shiny objects and you're going to make the wrong choice. And that's how you end up with a bunch of like 14-month gigs across your resume and become relatively unhireable as an executive.
And it brings it all back to the question you ask every candidate, right? Why this role? Why this company? Why now? Which
Mm-hmm.
is because if you can't articulate it, you're going to struggle
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Yeah. And if you've done your research up front, like the minute you decide I'm open to a new opportunity, whether you're passive or you're active as a candidate, if you do that activity with yourself of like, what are my top 3 values I'm looking for? What are my top 3 priorities I'm looking for in a role? And you can name it. Well, now when you go to research a company and you assess up against it, when you get in that first call and they say, why this company, why this job, why now, you can so clearly articulate a well thought through answer, not from a place of rehearsal, but from a place of deep introspection. And that's not only going to make you stand out, it's going to make it much clearer when it doesn't line up. Because again, it should be a 2-way street. You're looking at least the next 24 months. So if you don't see it at the top line level, how are you going to see it when it gets challenging in the weeds?
I love that.
Yeah. I'm glad you
sorry,
did.
the camera stopped for a
No,
second.
I'm going. Yeah. I
Well-
could talk forever, so.
Well, thank you so much. This was amazing. If people have not followed Heather, she is A, internet famous from MetaView, but B, I've gotten to know you over the last 4 or 5, 6 months. It's just been amazing how deeply thoughtful you are on talent. And people should definitely go check out Waypoint Works if they're thinking about high slope talent. And Heather, thank you so much.
Thank you. And you're right back at you. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and seeing everything you're doing with the Whispered community. It's awesome.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excited for our next chat.
Sounds good. Talk soon.